there is no political divide here. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. We talk about this medicine from the standpoint of having a spiritual aspect, it having a more than just physiological aspect. And that may be one of the benefits that we haven't talked about, we haven't thought about, is this may be a way to bring this country together.
This podcast discusses psychedelic assisted therapy, which involves the use of substances that are illegal in many countries. We prioritize safety and do not encourage illegal drug use. Psychedelic therapy should only be conducted in controlled legal settings under professional supervision. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider before considering any form of treatment. Okay, this is a very special edition of the New Health Club show because we have two incredible people today who we didn't think would come together for this. Rachel Yehuda, Governor Rick Perry. And you were already talking about how you guys met because I think everybody wants to know how you guys met.
So a friend of mine who knew you, and I was just getting into the this whole use of psychedelics for veterans' mental health. And I was in New York.
Yes.
And 2016?
No, it must have been 2018 or 19.
Yeah. I wasn't already Secretary of Energy, was I?
Your career details, I don't know.
Okay.
Very elegant.
Well, the point is, I wanted to meet you because you were doing some cutting edge work on the use of psychedelics for veterans' mental health. And Kevin Weiss, mutual friend, and he's who brought us together in New York.
Yeah.
And you were one of the early days for me of anyone who was actually a professional stepping into that. And we met there and spent nearly a day together.
Yeah, I remember. And you were the first person having anything to do with government that took this seriously. Up until then, everybody was like, are you kidding me? This is terrible. This isn't going to happen. It's a bad idea.
At the same time, my Morgan Luttrell, the twin brother of Marcus Luttrell, Marcus, who had lived with us from 2007 through 2009, and then I'd met Morgan during that period of time. And when Morgan gets out of the SEAL teams, he's working on his PhD at the University of Texas, Dallas, and I get selected by President Trump to go be his Secretary of Energy. And I call Morgan and say, hey, would you consider coming up? I wanted to have some people I knew, I trusted, some Texas boys, so to speak. And they had this nascent program at the Department of Energy working with the University of California, University of California, San Francisco, and they were using the DOE's supercomputers to scan the brains of these traumatic brain injured folks, and then obviously with this massive amount of data to look and see what the challenges were, what was the answer, how do we address this? And I asked Morgan if he would oversee that program. So all of that background. And in a conversation, may have not even been a direct conversation. I may have picked it up as an aside that he was talking about, hey, we sent so-and-so down to Mexico to be treated with Ibogaine. I'm like, what? You're doing what? And I'm kind of like, you need to be really careful with that. So that was my first introduction to, I want to say it was late 2017, early 2018. Mm-hmm. And it was about the same time that I met you that all of this kind of came onto my radar screen. And rather than just flatly wiping it away and saying, we're not, get away from me, Satan.
Satan?
Well,
okay.
I was curious.
Yes.
And I started talking to people
that's what struck
like this
me.
doctor.
Yeah. He was curious.
Yeah.
I was just starting. I hadn't set anything up. I was at the beginning of what was going to be a really long and bumpy road. And we must have spoken 20 times between that meeting and my getting permission. You kept offering to intervene. Do you want me to call your director? And I was like, no, I think that would not be
that was my
do it.
That was my governor coming out in me. So, well, let me call him. I'm the governor of Texas.
I mean,
I'll tell him what to do.
No, but it was.
And Rachel's like,
no,
I've got this.
I got this.
Easy way.
Yeah, but it was. That's what was so remarkable about it. You were asking me to explain things to you, but I didn't really know very much at all back then. I was just really at the same stage that you were in. I had first thought it was not such a good idea. You got to be careful. And then I started getting very, very curious. What I knew when I met you, which is why I think it might have been 2018 at least, or because that's when I went to therapist training. What I absolutely knew was that I was going to find out whether it works for veterans. That's the least we could do, would be to study this. But I hadn't decided yet, and I don't think you had either, that this was the way to go forward. But if people were saying that it was, I knew that we couldn't ignore that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have the rare moment to have, let's say, two very established people already in their careers coming into this with already like a set of tools to make things happen. So most of the time, if you have somebody from the psychedelic space on the panel or like on a podcast, it's people kind of starting to create something. But you guys are coming in at a very high level. And what I find interesting is from the moment you were just describing to now, where obviously we talk about this in a bit, a lot of dramatic or drastic things are happening in Texas. So what was the pathway to the moment now, and what kept you believing in this as something that's way bigger than maybe just a nice new fun industry or like on a bigger level?
Well, I think our paths are parallel. I think we both were curious. I think we're both motivated by a very deep desire to deliver something for our veterans that actually will work. And that although we're supposed to say that we do that already,
yeah,
we both knew from the veterans that we know that have struggled to get well that we don't do what we're supposed to do, and it's not their fault. And we have a lot of language in psychiatry and mental health that upsets me personally. We say that when people don't respond to certain therapies or medications, we call them treatment resistant, as if it's on them. You didn't do your homework in psychotherapy, or maybe something about you that is making this treatment that should be helpful, that we've decided is helpful for you, not work. And the reality isn't that you're treatment resistant. The reality is that we have failed to provide the correct treatment.
Interesting. How I came to this was because of when Marcus Luttrell ended up at the governor's residence in 2007. And for the next 2.5 years, he lived with us. And we saw firsthand how poor our government was at dealing with this issue of PTSD, of addictions, the challenges. And I want to back up a little bit, because this is really a philosophical issue from my perspective and a historical observation. We as a society have not been at war as long as what we have put our young warfighters into those environment for the last 20 years. You think about this. I mean, from 2002 until War on Terror still goes on. But I mean, for a decade and a half, we're intensely rotating these young men and women into these areas of combat. And in the history of mankind, we've never had that type of intensity and frequency of rotations. I mean, will suggest to you it's never happened. Didn't happen during the Civil War, didn't happen in World War I, didn't happen in World War II, Vietnam. Now, we increased the amount of time that these people were in combat. If you think about a 1st Division Army captain in 1944, may have, the end of 43, North Africa, into Sicily, back over to England, preparing for the invasion in June the 6th of 44. So a couple of years that they were in combat. These warfighters we have today may have 8, 9, 10 deployments into incredibly, periods of time, psychologically, where it's fight or flight all the time. There's very few moments that they're not heads on a swivel and the chemicals running through their brain, the anxiety that's created, the fight or flight that's going on in their brains. I've been pretty critical of our government, of the VA, and I'll give you an example. Marcus, when he showed up, he got separated in an oddball way, and I think partly because this is a kid who had the Navy Cross. This is a kid who was a very unique individual. They didn't know how to handle him. They just knew he couldn't go into combat because he was broken physically and mentally. So they just separated him. He wasn't even eligible for TRICARE. I literally had to get on the phone, call then Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus, who was the old governor of Mississippi. That's how I knew him. We were governors together. And I called him. I said, Mr. Secretary. I didn't think I called him governor. I said, hey, Governor, better title. I said, Governor, I said, you got a kid here who literally has been kind of dumped to the curb. And I said, he's not even eligible for TRICARE. And I said, this kid's, he needs physical, he needs mental care. And I said, you and your boss, then President Obama, are about to be embarrassed because this kid's book just made #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And I said, there's a whole bunch of people in the world are going to know who this guy is. And when the story gets out that we just kind of unceremoniously dumped him out there, I said, this ain't going to reflect well on your president and my president, your president, our president.
Our president,
and
always.
I said, us. It's not going to reflect well on us. And now, to Ray Mabus's credit, he had Marcus brought back in, reevaluated, found not fit for duty, and eligible for TRICARE, which allowed us to have access to some dollars. And I'll leave the rest to history. He got taken care of, but my point with that long cock and bull story is this: our government didn't know how to handle these young people, and then by the mid-2000s, particularly like at the Burn Center and at BAMC in San Antonio, they were just handing out opioids like candy to these kids who had been burned, who had been affected, Marcus being, one of them. That we just didn't know how to deal with this. And that's one of the reasons, fast forward to what Dr. Yehuda is doing at the VA, is now catching up with the new theories, the new treatments that can actually heal these kids. What the opioid epidemic did, what the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma did, is unconscionable. Now, I realize that, just last week there was a $7.4 billion settlement with the 50 states and the 4 territories of the United States and Purdue Pharma. And that's fine. I'm glad we've got those resources to be redistributed out there to help. But what they did is just unconscionable. And for our government to basically have been a partner in that, that's one of the reasons that I think what we're doing in Texas and what we're doing in hopefully 15, 20 other states will come along and do these clinical trials and kind of get away from a one-size-fits-all in Washington, D.C., here's how we're going to do everything, and let all of these laboratories of innovation, that's the beauty of what our founding fathers had by creation of all these states. Let these states engage in these clinical trials. I'm focused on Ibogaine.
Yeah.
There may be some states. We helped pass in 2021 in Texas clinical trials for psilocybin and I think MDMA too. Dr. Lynette Averill is overseeing those now. So, I'm excited that we're seeing a paradigm shift, if you will, from my perspective of, oh gosh, it's our war fighters, so the VA has to take care of all of that.
Yeah.
I like VA as a partner. I want you to be my partner, but let us run these trials as well. Let us, spend the money and do the things that we can do. And all of us collectively can potentially find some answers that maybe we wouldn't have found otherwise.
Yeah, and Rachel, from your perspective, so you're stand for the scientist right now. So what is the thing you need most from, let's say, the country or from a governor or from government as a scientist who really wants to get into this now?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I think that from the time I met Governor Perry till we actually launched a trial, till we were able to go through all of the steps and enroll the first person, it might have been 2 years.
Okay.
To go through all the regulatory steps. It might have even been 2.5 years. There was a little bit of COVID in there that didn't help matters. But we had to go through 3 local committees, the Institutional Review Board, the Research and Development Committee. We had to go through safety committees. We would get lists back of all the things that the VA would struggle with in order to do research with Schedule I compounds. Then we had to take the protocol to the FDA and through the DEA and through, because we're in New York, the Bureau of Narcotics. And then you have to go back through the steps. I changed directors in middle of all this, and my new director didn't know from psychedelics and didn't also know me. My former director basically said, okay, I trust you, but this was a new person and this was psychedelics. And so it just was a really long process, only for one reason, because the drugs are Schedule I compounds. If this were the case with any other potential treatment, none of this drama would be occurring. So one thing that I think is a really easy solution is to reschedule these compounds so that people can have more experience with them. I also think clinical trials isn't the only solution.
Okay.
Increasingly, clinical trials present only one perspective. The people that get to enter clinical trials have to be within a narrower band than what you see in clinical practice. So I think real world data from open access trials is also important. Let some people see what it's like to treat patients and report back. That's not science, but it's observation, which is the first cousin of science. So we shouldn't be wedded to this rigid way of randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials, especially since placebo control doesn't mean anything. A veteran that calls us is desperate for these kinds of therapies, we're not giving placebo. I mean, we already made that decision. None of our trials have placebo. We're not a drug company, and we don't have to get it approved through the FDA. That's not what our center is about. We want to see what happens, what kind of healing is possible for veterans. So anyone that will be enrolled in our studies right now is going to, for PTSD, is going to receive an active psychedelic treatment. And then or an active treatment, we can compare standard of care that the VA offers to psychedelic therapy. There's a lot of sentiment that the VA already has therapies. They're evidence-based. So yeah, good. Let's compare the evidence-based therapies to this approach. There's a lot of discussion about what kinds of psychotherapies to use. Good. We can compare one thing against another, and that way everybody gets something, which I think is a moral and ethical obligation that we have to our veterans.
And I mean, you were just a while ago on Joe Rogan, right? I mean, that was a huge step for somebody like you, together with Brian Hubbard, to really be very open about the positive aspects of this. I mean, coming from a rather conservative background, I assume, this is a very diplomatic way of saying it, but it is conservative. I mean, we just, we have a bipartisan, I don't know, policy, whatever. I'm not interested in creating more friction.
And you bring up something really interesting, and that I have a historical conservative background, 40 years in public service. The governor of Texas, a very red state, worked for President Trump as the Secretary of Energy. And one of the things that draws me to this issue from a kind of a citizen perspective is that there is no political divide here. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue.
Exactly.
We have, there are a lot of Republicans out there that are supporting this, a lot of Democrats that are out there supporting this. In Colorado, the governor of Colorado and I are very different politically. I mean, Jared is he is a very liberal Democrat. I'm a very conservative Republican. But we share a common view and a common support for this issue of Ibogaine in this case. So I think if we talk about this medicine from the standpoint of having a spiritual aspect, it having a more than just physiological aspect, and that may be one of the benefits that we haven't talked about, we haven't thought about, is this may be a way to bring this country together. Exactly. Where people who, when Jared Paulus and Rick Perry can be on the stage together and, basically together working on this issue, then it's kind of like it might make it a little easier for us to work on something else together. And I think so. My hope is that this medicine and this effort to give people hope, to give people their lives back, literally, may heal more than just minds. It could heal this country. It could heal this world. Now, I know that may start to sound a little woo-woo, but the fact is that's going to be our goal as we go forward. We've just passed the most historic, sweeping piece of legislation in Texas, $50 million to do clinical trials that had overwhelming support. Only 2 dissenting votes out of 150 in the House had passed unanimously in the Senate. Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Speaker Burrows, all publicly for this legislation. And that message across the country is going to be powerful into other states. We're going to have at least 15 other states, and I would suggest probably more than that. We're going to be hopefully up meeting with Secretary Kennedy, with Attorney General Bondi, because the DEA is over in her shop as we reschedule.
It's a nice way of saying it's over in her shop.
Yeah.
That's a great way.
Yeah. So the point is we have, changing our focus now. Americans for Ibogaine, which we helped create, within the last 30 days. Brian Hubbard is the CEO. I'm the chairman of the board. Sherry Ruland's the secretary. Ann Claire Stapleton is running the communication side of it. Marcus and Melanie Luttrell are the other 2 board members, a very small group, purposely kept that way. Our goal is to help educate the public. We're not going to be raising money to send people down to Mexico. There's some other great organizations like Vets that are raising money to send folks down to Ambio. There's Beyond Services to send folks down to Beyond. So that they play a very important role. That's not what we're going to be doing. We're going to be focusing on the education side of it, because I'm a huge believer, just like we saw in Texas, if you will be open and educate the public, once they look at the data, they look at the personal stories that come out from this, they see the absolute hope and in practice what this medicine can do, the vast majority of the general public will get behind this. So into the federal government, working with Bobby Kennedy and Matt Zorn and those folks over at HHS, working with the DEA. Then my goal, our goal, is to go into Israel, is to go into Ukraine,
Rachel,
and potentially other countries, but those two in particular. And I've got some great personal relationships there. I've known BB since the late '90s, and
BB,
Prime Minister.
Yeah.
My counterpart, the Minister of Energy, when I was the Secretary of Energy, Yuval Steinitz, who is now the head of the Raphael Corporation. So we got some great friends in Israel, and they're very open to this type of treatment.
But I quickly want to ask, like, Rachel, is this also your experience that people would say that did you show people data and they would be like, oh yeah, sure, it makes total sense? Because I feel it's just sometimes a part of making people, convincing people that this is good.
Again, this is a complicated issue. I think what you've done is amazing. But there are other things that need to happen, not through you. You've done more than your share, but to just have this be in states is a problem, because our military is not a state thing, and our VA system is national. And so we have to also make this available. We can't just send people out to foreign countries to be able to get psychedelics. What has really worked for us and for veterans is that they were able to access MDMA. They were able to access a psychedelic therapy within the context of a safe environment where they have been receiving care. And the most important thing is that they can continue to receive care. And that is the part we don't talk about. We have big transformational changes with psychedelics, but they open you to begin. And we can't just leave people high and dry
so
after
the therapist
a psychedelic.
side of this.
Absolutely. It's what are you going to do now that you know that you have a future? Now that you know that what happened to you doesn't need to keep you stuck and define you for the negative, that you don't have to live in a prison of your own mind because you can't escape it. You know that now from the psychedelic. You know that there are possibilities. You know that people can love you and that you're worthy of being loved and that you can love too. Now you have to do the step-by-step repair work, and that requires an infrastructure that goes beyond giving the psychedelic, and we have it. It's called the VA. So how are we going to make the VA
great point,
friendly and hospitable to taking people that have these experiences, either within the VA or out? I think personally, I think both things should be available, but really training our workforce to really help people move on in a certain way. We don't do that now. In the VA, what we have now, God help me, I don't want to criticize the VA, but the model that we have now is called an episodes of care model. And it suggests that you come in an acute emergency and we'll see you for a little while. Then you'll go until the next episode. I understand that model, but I think that an even better model would be if we can help people really turn the page on the past in a way that also helps them remember those words that story and carry it forward so that they can do great things. Almost everybody that does psychedelics wants to then help other veterans or help other people or do something positive with their lives or be more present in their families or show up at work in a different way or just show up in society in a different way. But you can't just leave them alone to do that. That is the beauty of the VA. If I know that people are talking about cuts, but mental health should be enhanced. No one knows how to do mental health better for veterans than the VA workforce. I stand by that, and I don't care what VA you're in. Now, I know people have had bad experiences and they've had trouble accessing care, and I know that there are problems, but the individual clinicians that are there, they're the best. They understand this.
And I think you bring up a really good point, Rachel, that the limiting factor for this treatment of plant medicine, most likely, after we deal with the scheduling issue of Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, those kind of things, just to, to smooth it out, the big limiting factor is going to be in training therapists to deal with this massive amount of backlog, if you will, of people after they've been treated. Then what's the follow-up? And follow-up is really important.
Yeah, so thanks to the Bob and Renee Parsons Foundation, they gave us a very generous gift, specifically for training therapists at the VA and the DoD. And we have now trained 250 therapists in how to work with psychedelics. We're very proud of that. But the most amazing thing that has happened is that they've told us that they go back to doing regular mental health work in a different way after they understand really what it means to help a veteran search for kind of the parts of themselves that have been lost or that need to come back, which is a very different approach than the cognitive behavioral therapies that we use now, which are very specifically focused and targeted. They're fine for a specific and focused target reason, but when you're having an existential crisis and a spiritual crisis and a moral crisis and a family crisis, and you feel that the only people that will ever understand you are the people that you served with, and maybe God will or won't even understand you, and then you have a very radical experience of transformation. You want to process that for a really long time, not just one session or 3 sessions or 5 sessions. You want to really let that settle in and really have someone walk you through change. And I just think that story has to be told. I don't want to abandon veterans again by saying that an experience alone is going to be what they need. It's the beginning of the rest of their lives, but we want to also be there for that.
And I just thought of something as you were talking, Dr. Yehuda, when you talk about the follow-up. And I'm going to ask you about something. I don't know whether we've ever talked about this, but it's good a time as any to
surely you can
ask
call
you.
me Rachel.
I'm not going to embarrass you. Well, I love calling you doctor because you earned it.
I think.
You earned it.
Exactly.
But is the follow-up, and there are different ways to address. There's probably going to be some individuals out there, as we see with drug-resistant depression. There are just going to be some folks who are like, I'm just not going to take that plant medicine. I'm just not going to do it. Absolutely not going to do it for whatever reason. And I ran across, and I think I talked to you about this, but I ran across a protocol that I was very skeptical about. Talk therapy's always been one of those things I'm kind of like, that's single-digit success rates with talk therapy. Mm-hmm. But this is called reconsolidation of traumatic memories. Mm-hmm. And totally skeptical when I first saw it. And then these folks said, well, we've had really good success. And I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go find 5 veterans that have PTSD, and I'm going to send them to you. And I realize 5's a small sample, but I said, you treat them. And this is literally a talk therapy type of an approach. You can literally do it on a Zoom call, which really makes a lot of difference from the standpoint of people who, can't load up and go to the New York VA or what have you, maybe way out in the country. But they had in the upwards of 80% success rate with the people that, and all 5 of these individuals came back and said it
helped.
It really helped. So
I
want to ask you about that.
Yeah, you bring up a really important point, and that is you don't need psychedelics to heal. That's one pathway. But what the psychedelic movement has taught me is that the elements of healing really involve a much greater range of things than we have currently been focusing on in a medicalized environment. They require really taking care of your spiritual, emotional, physical, self-care is a part of it. There are so many different threads, your creative expression. I mean, we really can't just focus on a trauma as if it were a tumor. We have to focus on your identity, why you wanted to serve, help you reconnect with your mission, what it is about you that you're most proud of, that you feel you lost, that you have to want to connect with. I mean, how you can engage better with your family. I mean, many veterans come back and they suffer because of the ruptures in their marriages. They can't really deal with their children. And we have to do those things.
Let me ask you something. This is really one of the fascinating things from my perspective, because this is such a multifaceted issue. So if you've got a family member who's kind of like, get out of here, wanting to go play with these psychedelics and stuff, and you don't have the family buy-in, how do you deal with that? But I mean, I get treated, I come home, and they're like, you're not perfect, or you're not this, or you're not that. I mean, how do you deal with that? So it's not just the warfighter you're dealing with; it's also their support mechanism.
Yes. What I would advise for somebody whose spouse or partner is skeptical is to draw them in and to have them participate in preparation. I think you can't send somebody back when you do trauma work with a psychedelic or anything. If you do a prolonged exposure therapy, any therapies that you might do for a trauma survivor, you can't send them back into a negative environment. You have to not just look at what they're suffering from now, but the environment in which they are suffering those symptoms. And if you have a rupture in your family dynamics, you really have to address that. So if you're curious about doing psychedelics and your spouse is reluctant, I mean, the answer is to be able to bring in the spouse and talk about it. What is your fear? A lot of times people fear when somebody changes, even if it's healing.
That's interesting.
A drastic change changes the dynamic.
Yeah.
And so maybe someone settled into, okay, I'm going to take care of you. And maybe that's comfortable for them. And maybe they don't even know that they feel that way, right? And maybe the focus has just been on you all the time. Somebody said it in a session yesterday, Marsha, Marsha, Marsha. It was a funny line from an old show called The Brady Bunch. Sometimes the focus is so much just on the veteran and not on the spouse and not on the family. And the spouse just gets used to sitting in the background. And when the spouse says, no, I don't want you to do that, that's a very rich opportunity to bring that spouse in and say, well, tell me about your experience now being married to somebody that has changed and is in some ways doesn't want to give all of the identity up that they have now. I mean, combat is defining. Serving in the military is defining. The bond that somebody has when they meet a fellow veteran, instant. We know something that other people don't know. Mm-hmm. We've been through something other people don't know. And the spouse can feel left out of it. So
totally.
it means more than I don't want him to do it, it means 100 things that need to be unpacked. And I would unpack them before the psychedelic trip. I would work on this jointly as a joint project. You know, I really like Amber and Marcus Capone. They're a couple that really know how to talk about exactly this issue of how what happened to him affected her and how she was really part of the solution. If she would have behaved in a different way, would his healing have been the same way? I don't know. But the idea of making this something that is larger than the veteran, it's about the marriage, it's about the family, it's about the community, it's about society, it's about all of those things. That's why we have an obligation through VA. It's not just about healing people, it's about healing our communities.
But I have a question about Texas. So why do you think this very successful, didn't take very long activity was happening in Texas? Is there a certain thing you would describe that this is a place where this is just really, it's you, it was only you, she's pointing at you.
No,
you and Joe Rogan.
I was a little cog in a big machine. And
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I
you're
don't
sweet
think
to say
so.
that, Rachel. But
I think you were a big cog.
so here's my observation. Knowing the state rather intimately, having been a state representative, a statewide elected official, the presiding officer in the Senate for a while, and the governor for 14 years, I have a better than average understanding of the mechanisms of how the place works. Timing is everything, as a lot of things happen in the world. In 2021, there was an effort. Marcus and Amber Capone, again, played a very important role in passing the clinical trials for psilocybin and MDMA. And in 2021, this was very early in the psychedelic world, if you will. I mean, and we brought in veterans who are admired and respected. And that piece of legislation passed. I want to say there were only 7 dissenting votes in the House for that. And again, the key from my perspective was the veterans organization, the veterans support groups that are out there that came and worked the legislature. I mean, literally we had people come and sit down with members of the legislature who maybe in January of 2025 were a no. We're, for whatever reason, you know, I'm not for this stuff. This is outside of the mainstream. $50 million we don't have. $50 million we're certainly not going to spend on that. I mean, there are a lot of reasons. It's a lot easier to say no in government than it is to say yes, because when you say yes, then you're responsible for whatever this is. If you say no, just life goes on. Yeah. So you ask a specific question, why were we successful this session in Texas? I will suggest to you it was a big team effort, very well coordinated. The Vets Organization, the Reed Foundation, I can't remember the group that Davidson headed up. Logan had a group called, anyway, there was another organization out there that did an excellent job of educating the public and in educating the members of the legislature. So, you know, and that's not rocket science. I mean, that's a model that's worked for probably time immemorial, is that if you can get in front of the members, if you can educate them, if you can get the public behind it. We live in a representative constitutional democracy out there. That's how things are supposed to work. The people come and say, we're for this, we want you to vote for it.
So I have a question. I guess just why focus just on Ibogaine when Ibogaine is just one of many different potential psychedelic therapies that might help. So Ibogaine's, that's a tough one for many people. That's a strong one. And there are gentler approaches with MDMA and psilocybin, and there are new compounds.
And we have those ongoing in Texas now already.
Yeah. So I just think that that's really important as part of the education, that if you don't have to go extreme, you can start out gentler. People can do shorter. We haven't studied this yet, but I'm very interested in 5-MeO-DMT. I wonder what happens in a shorter experience. We have ketamine that wasn't developed as a psychedelic. People that developed it weren't thinking psychedelic. Even for depression, they weren't thinking psychedelic. But perhaps some of the properties of ketamine can be psychedelic-like, and putting therapy in with the ketamine can also be can get somebody in a deeper place.
Maybe there's a protocol with microdosing of ketamine. I have no idea.
I don't know.
And that's my
Never heard of that either.
That's my point with having all of these clinical trials.
Yeah.
So we've got 3 compounds now in the state of Texas that are being clinically trialed, studied: psilocybin, MDMA, and soon in September, Ibogaine. So this is actually a progressive process, the way I look at it in the state of Texas. Ibogaine, why Ibogaine now? And I think it was because people like me got educated about it, we got comfortable with it, we saw the results of it. The clinical trial that Nolan Williams did out of Stanford was the real pivotal moment for me.
For you, yeah.
When I looked at that data, when
Yes.
my neurosurgeon friend, who is a total skeptic about this, saw that data, and he talked to those veterans, and he went from skeptic to curious to today an absolute and total supporter of this, to the point of being an absolute public spokesperson for these clinical trials.
Right. I just also want to give a shout out to the fact that these psychedelics go beyond mental health. The Department of Defense just funded one of our colleagues at the Bronx VA that we're going to be collaborating with, Dr. Wecht, for a study on psilocybin in spinal cord injury, to help people with their phantom pain and all kinds of issues related to neurologic problems. It's also being thought about for traumatic brain injury. So there are a lot of wounds of war, literal wounds of war, that can be potentially helped by psychedelics. So it's just really important, because there is still stigma with mental health, in a way that there isn't stigma for these kinds of neurologic conditions. And I think that we really need to understand the potential. There are trials now in Parkinson's, in epilepsy, and all sorts of conditions that affect people. Why? Because this isn't about a specific diagnosis. It's about something else. It's about helping the brain learn new things. And we don't know the limits of what the brain can learn, not just psychological lessons. Maybe the brain can learn other ways to heal itself physically. This is a whole new world. Yeah. And one of the things that happens when you confront something new is that you're not quite sure what to do with the old, right?
That's a very interesting thing to say.
Should you hang on to it? Do you still need it?
It's also your identity.
It's your identity. But if all this is true, and psychedelics help the brain and the body and the mind and the spirit learn new things, then we have to think a lot about how we're dealing with certain things now, and whether they do or don't fit into that framework. In psychiatry, we were taught for a long time that it's just, brain chemistry. tinker with this neurotransmitter or this receptor. We don't want psychedelics to fall into that trap. It could. People talk a lot about receptors in psychedelics too. But we want to be able to really understand the underlying idea of why people are having transformational experiences. And there's a biology to it. It could be epigenetic biology, it could be a neuroplasticity biology. The devil's in the details. But what we know is that it's big. And the more we learn about it, the more healing can happen. And it's not just for people who have a diagnosis. It could be for people that just have a problem or a wound.
Like everybody else.
Yes.
So
it could be everyone. Anyone.
I mean, you have just opened up the chapter of this book that is the most fascinating to me. And that is, we started this as how do we help these war fighters who are suffering from post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. I mean, that was this narrow path. And now we've opened up a super highway of fascinating potential destinations. For instance, we've been told forever that when you had these injuries to your brain, when this traumatic brain injury occurred, when this event occurred, if you took these substances and it killed these brain cells, they're gone. There's no recovery. We were taught that forever. That's solid rock, not going to change. This medicine is potentially telling us, nope, that's not right. This medicine literally has the ability to regenerate the brain.
Certain ways in which the brain works.
Correct. Yeah. But my point is this.
Yes.
So the clinical trial of the 30 veterans, the Stanford postdocs that analyzed this along with Dr. Williams, they saw measurable increases of white matter in the brain. That's regeneration, correct?
Well, more white matter could be a lot of things. It could be more myelin being created by oligodendrocytes, which are also brain cells different than neurons, but it could have a lot of mechanisms, synapses. I mean, the point is that the brain can change. That's why we need to be doing all of these clinical trials. Yes, we need to figure it out exactly.
And because this medicine has opened up a view into brain science that we did not know was there. Is that a fair statement?
I think it's a fair statement. I think that in addition to wanting to really understand the brain science, we really want to understand the kind of changes people make in their lives. Because one of the things that is limiting right now in mental health research in psychiatry and psychology is that we narrowly focus our outcomes on symptoms. You had 5 nightmares last week. Maybe now you only have 2. Okay. But what about the fact that you just got engaged to be married? For the first time, you thought about the possibility of having a family. Where do I measure that? That's amazing. Those kinds of things happen to veterans in our trials. Wow. They started living their lives. It's not even a matter of a number going down on the scale, so to speak. It's a matter of just waking up and understanding that there is a new world out there
for them.
And what trauma really does is it sometimes restricts your imagination about the future. There used to be a symptom in an old version of PTSD. It's not there anymore. I loved that symptom. I was sad they took it out. It was called sorry.
Only Rachel.
I was sad.
Only Dr. Yehuda can say this.
Psychologist, research psychologist. It was called a sense of foreshortened future. What that means is that you don't think that you're going to live very long. If I said to you, so how much money did you save? Do you have put away for your retirement? A combat veteran with PTSD would say, I'm not going to live that long. I'm not planning for I'm not planning for the future. I can barely get through the present. Now, this ability, it's why veterans also don't take good care of themselves, because self-care means there's a tomorrow.
What was it Willie Nelson said? if I'd known I was going to live this long, I had taken better care of myself.
Oh my God, that's exactly it. So imagine imagine thinking that there is no future. That's one of the symptoms of trauma. It's no longer an actual symptom of PTSD because these things can be a little bit arbitrary. They're done by committee. But the idea is that these psychedelics can open up the possibility of a future. All healing does that, even without psychedelics. It makes you see that there's a future, not just a past which is overwritten, and not just a present which you're struggling to get through, but perhaps something better for you.
I have one question. I have to come back to this Joe Rogan thing, because when I saw this, I mean, obviously it was a very big, moment for a lot of reasons. So, but I was thinking, so after this show, so you go home, you go shopping, food shopping with your family. So, and people have seen you on this show in your maybe friend circle, even, political context. So how do we have to imagine this, how people come to you and approach you after this and say, are you out of your mind to do this? From there going to, oh my God, I had no idea, I admire you. So, because I'm always curious, like a person like you being in the spotlight and being not a psychedelic, person per se. So how do we have to imagine this?
I'm already a recognizable individual because of my previous life. The governor of Texas, the secretary of energy, and then, of course, being on Dancing with the Stars, right?
Yeah.
So I'm already a person who, in a lot of cases, I get recognized when I go places. But here was the interesting thing. The number of people who have come up and said, thank you for what you've done, relative to that podcast, has been pretty overwhelming for me. And I'm relatively used to people coming up or recognizing me and saying, hey, Governor, how are you? Or, but there's been a real change. And I think you recognize that, the reason you asked the question. And here's the fascinating thing for me, and the reason I think this issue is so powerful. Because there may be people who have followed my political career, knew my conservative leanings, the things that we did, whether it was on social issues or whether you name it. That, when you're in the public eye, when you're an elected official, when you're the governor of the state of Texas, you have to make a lot of decisions that split the baby from time to time. And you make half of the people happy, half the people mad.
That's what it means, split the baby?
Yes.
Okay.
That's an old biblical term.
Okay. Good.
Solomon.
Okay.
But the point is, people who politically are not on the same team that I'm on have come up and I know they're not on the same team that I'm on, but have come up and set that aside. What you're doing on this issue is so profound. And in some cases, a lot of people think it's courageous. I'll tell you an aside. When I first came public about my support on this, probably 5 years ago, and I was publicly making some statements about this, one of my political consultants called me and said, Governor, what are you doing?
Okay.
You're about to throw away 40 years of political reputation out the window. What are you doing? And I said, well, I don't think so. I said, for two reasons. I said, number one, I've studied this. I said, I have really spent the time studying this, talking to people who have been treated, with researchers, with the Dr. Rachel Yehudas of the world, people who really know this. And I said, I'm comfortable that I'm on solid ground here. And I said, secondly, if losing my reputation is what it cost, it's worth it.
Wow. Okay.
At some point, you just have to tell the truth, or your truth, and not worry about that. I mean, in a much smaller scale, academics who started to do work in psychedelics also, risked that very same thing,
Yeah,
the
of course.
reputation.
Yeah.
And, it's true. A lot of people have come to me at this conference and told me the pressure they feel to write grants a certain way, to include evidence-based therapies that they don't think are not necessarily good matches for psychedelics, because they believe their peers will not fund their grants unless they, approach the study of psychedelics from a very traditional vantage point. People do worry about their reputations, but there are bigger problems to solve than that. We have to start really doing something for other people and not just worry about our reputations and our careers. And that's what I try to tell younger people who are concerned about this. Eventually, people will come around. It will be the outcomes that turn people around, not the science. But the fact that on this earth there will be people that are noticeably better and are just living lives in a different kind of way. The reason is that, because I said it before, I have to say it again, people who are fully healed from trauma, it doesn't have to be through psychedelics, but that's a very good route. They often turn around and try to make the world a better place. And if we don't have enough people that are trying to make the world a better place, it's possible that they're walking around with a lot of trauma. And so it's really important to be able to to have things that can help people process things. There's a lot of things happening in the world today. So
meaning that if you the goal you would have to reach as a very established and powerful person is to overcome your fear of reputation, and it makes you actually stronger.
I think there are people that every day make hard decisions that may impact their reputation. Some people decide to take the easy route. Some people decide to, I'm going to fix my bayonet and run up that hill.
Right. It's character logic.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of being established.
Yeah.
It's about what draws you in to do certain things. I mean, it's reconnecting with your mission. Why are you here? You're not here to establish. If you're here to establish a reputation, then of course you need to worry about it.
Yeah.
But if you're here to do something different, then go do that different thing.
So what is because I think we have to wrap it up. What is your outlook or your wish for the next years in psychedelics, and how could you work on this together?
Well, Rachel's observation that the VA can be the major central focus of the therapeutic side of this and the therapy that needs to go on after a treatment. I think with the leadership, with Secretary Collins, sending some very clear messages that he is open and supportive of plant medicine for PTSD, other applications, is a powerful message. I think you're going to hear and see the same thing out of HHS. I think you're going to see the same things out of the Department of Justice with the DEA. I think you literally all the way up to including the President of the United States. I think when President Trump is fully educated on this, there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to say, let's go get this done. Come on, let's go. Quit wasting time. And with that effort, then I think the challenge then is what Rachel brought up, training up the therapist to be able to fill the pipeline for the need that's out there. The need is huge. The workforce is meager from the standpoint of having enough therapists out there. I kind of put this in the same category as AI-driven data centers. Not to change subjects here, but the comparable here is AI is going to, we are full on into developing artificial intelligence in this country. And we're in a literal war with other countries. Who gets there first is going to be the winner. So these data centers are massive, massive energy hogs. We have two restraining issues. One is the amount of energy, and we don't have enough energy to drive all these data centers. And the second one is the workforce to build the data centers, the trades, and having enough electricians, welders, HVAC, all of the trades, the Mike Rowe's of the world out there, if you will. We don't have enough of those, just like we don't have enough therapists in the psychedelic side of things. And that's, I think, one of the things we got to focus on, and to fill that pipeline with those qualified individuals who have the passion and the desire to go out there and be the therapist that we have to have.
Yeah, on that topic, not every therapist has to be a psychedelic therapist. I think the idea is really to educate people on what it would have meant that somebody participated in psychedelic therapy and what work they would now need to do that could be done by a person even if they don't do the psychedelic side. I actually think that the workforce is really eager to learn about this. People are tired of doing things and not having their patients get better enough. It's a little demoralizing sometimes. Again, I'll say it, the therapists at VA certainly are of the highest quality, and they can learn new things. And I think we just want to set up the infrastructure right. But in terms of the larger question, I like the fact that there's alignment in government and alignment with maybe industry and with practitioners, really singing from the same sheet of music on this issue, I think is really important. And then going through the steps. I think the low-hanging fruit starts with removing the stigma associated with these drugs being illegal. I think we can start having much better conversations and start doing more exploration when we shift our paradigm from, these are harmful drugs, that egg in the frying pan, this is your brain on drugs, to this is your brain on drugs.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you guys for doing these conversations, because that's going to be very powerful all over the world. People like you talking about this in the way you're doing it. So thank you very much. Very grateful
You're welcome.
For this duo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and thank you for listening to the show. If you want to know more about how we fast-track psychedelic destigmatization, please head over to the New Health Club podcast on Apple or Spotify. There are many episodes talking about several substances, several treatments, several ways how psychedelics can be used these days. You also find us on Instagram under the New Health Club. But if you want to know more about our nonprofit foundation, the New Health Institute, please head over to www.thenewhealthinstitute.org. Of course, we are here on Instagram too, under the New Health Institute. Very important to me is also that you subscribe to our newsletter on Substack. Please look for the newhealthclub.substack.com. This is very important to me because we really start to build right now a media platform on Substack around psychedelics and new health topics. And of course, we would love your support on this, and love if you subscribe. Love if you tell other people, your friends, your family, your community, so we can really kick off this endeavor and actually have another place, another platform next to the podcast where we can get you information and education around psychedelics.